Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 2 of the 2A Collective podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. It is my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Bienas, an avid 2A advocate from Washington State. Having published a book called Women's Guide to Concealed Carry and various other articles, I know she has a lot to share and contribute to the conversation. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Of course. Well, there's a lot of information to cover. I know there's a lot going on in Washington State. You were just able to testify against, I believe it was HB 1163.
Yeah, and it's actually in Ways and Means Committee today, and at 1:30 my time, I'll be hopefully testifying again. Hopefully I'll get called again. This is our last step for this, Ways and Means. So we've got a lot of people signed in opposing it. So we'll see what happens on that after today.
I know you've mentioned it a few times in your Instagram posts, but what exactly are they trying to do?
Well, we have two bills that passed through committee this year. So the first one is essentially gun-free zones. That's 5098 is that bill, and that's also in Ways and Means today. I'm going to try to testify on that, but of course they put them both at the same exact time at 1:30 so that they would, have to split those of us who are opposed. So that one is essentially what they call sensitive places or gun-free zones. And the big problem with that, outside of the obvious that there should be no gun-free zones, is that they have written it as a broad measure that will essentially make all of Washington a gun-free zone because they refuse to specify where it is, and they said where children are likely to be present, which it's America. Children can go most places in America, except for places like bars where you can't carry and things like that. So it's too broad and it will not keep anybody safe. And then the second one is what you mentioned, 1163, and that is mandatory training plus permit to purchase. So that bill will require mandatory training before you purchase a firearm, including a test that you will have to shoot. So if you are a first-time firearm owner, you will have to know how to shoot a firearm to go shoot the test in front of Washington State Police, which frankly, they don't have the time, the money, or the manpower to even coordinate that. But what gun are you going to use to learn on? And what gun are you going to use to shoot? They haven't specified that. I don't think they understand how any of this works. And it will also require us, we currently do not shoot for our concealed carry permit. So here in Washington, we call it a CPL, your license. So we currently do not shoot for that, but you will be required to shoot for that. So that is going to entail at the next, if it passes through Ways and Means, and Ways and Means, for those who are not familiar, they have to figure out how to fund this in this committee. So they have to find the money to fund this, and they have to have a plan to fund this. And the plan, as I've written, or as I've read that they've written so far, is it's nonsense. They are severely under projecting the cost, the manpower, any of this stuff, which they did for our we recently got an extra Washington State background check. So once you go through your NICS, you pay $18 to get a Washington State background check, and the waiting period, that was in our last deal. So they don't have any idea how much it costs. Realistically, they don't have any idea how they're going to implement this. But in Washington, as of the most recent count, we have slightly over 700,000 concealed permit holders. So at the next renewal, if this passes, I believe it would go into effect in June of 2026. And at the next renewal after that, they will have to renew 700,000 permits with this same class, plus the amount of people who are going to purchase their firearm to get that initial 5-year permit to purchase license. So it's insanity, honestly. I mean, they don't understand how any of that works. They have no way to facilitate it. Our last governor, we have a new governor, and our last governor left us in a $12 billion deficit that he racked up over a matter of a couple of years. I mean, this hasn't, been a long time thing coming. So they have that on top of figuring out how to fund this, which they just can't.
It just kind of sounds like a bureaucratic nightmare. And if they can't figure it out, it's going to end up being, well, you ran out of time to renew your license or your permit, So
Yeah, I think
that's
it sounds like they are wanting to push people into, being caught carrying and becoming criminals, especially with the gun-free zones. They just don't really understand how any of that works, which maybe they do understand how it works. And I think, I've always thought that gun control was about control on a certain side and not about the guns at all. I learned very quickly when I got into this that they don't hate guns, they just hate that you have them. And we've had kind of a little bit of what I would call a phenomenon of our legislators getting up and talking about the bills, particularly in this session, and saying things like, I'm a gun owner and I spend a lot of time in the range. And the funny thing about that is I was watching one of the testimonies and they said that, and I was talking to my friend Ava Flanell, which if you follow 2A advocacy at all, you're familiar with her. She is fighting in Colorado, who is getting hammered right now like we are, and their bills are kind of mirroring ours. And she said that that's happening in Colorado too. They're saying the same things because if you watch closely the testimony all the time, if you watch it all the way through the process, you will see the same people testify on the anti-gun side, and they will often be representing organizations, Grandmothers Against Gun Violence, Moms Demand, all this. They'll put the high school kids in there, and the high school kids will get very emotional. We have done drills, and we are scared, and it's all written script. And if you just pop over to the state, who's going through the same thing, the testimony is almost word for word the same thing. So these scripts are being written and they are being very emotionally delivered. But as callous as it may sound, it means nothing because this is not, what these people really think. I mean, if it is, they should be able to write their own words about this and not take a script from some massive organization that is injecting tons and tons of money into our state that really does not have any stake in our state. They're not from our state. They're not here. We get a lot of the testimony that's allowed from people who aren't in our state. Johns Hopkins University talking about, the global pandemic of gun violence and all this other nonsense. So when you realize that that's happening in states like mine, you can quickly connect that to the federal level and how this is just a much deeper issue than Washington or Colorado being a heavy blue state. It goes much deeper than that.
Yeah, and it makes me think, like, why ostracize? Why spend so much energy fighting against the advocacy and the responsible, advocacy and advocacy from responsible parties for appropriate and effective gun ownership? Like, there's other battles to be had, and it certainly doesn't solve the gun violence problem. They're in essence advocating against self-defense. So okay, what's next? We're going to take karate away from kids?
Yeah, it's hard to say because I think you come to different conclusions depending on how long you've been researching this and experiencing this. So my background is that I didn't grow up in Washington State. I'm not from here. My husband and I both grew up in New York State, which is the OG of gun control. So New York State has been doing gun control since the 60s and even before, so well before I was around. So growing up, I didn't have a stance on it either way, but growing up, I thought, yeah, you have to get a permit to purchase a gun. Nobody can carry because it was, a May issue state, and the permitting process, even when I was a kid, was insane. You'd have to get people to corroborate your personality or whatever. I can't remember what they call it, but you'd have to coordinate all these people. You'd have to have a state trooper come to your house. You'd have to go appear in front of a judge. And the reason that you wanted to carry couldn't be self-defense. So you had to have some other reason. So growing up, I thought, okay, well, this is normal. This is what it is because I was a kid, so I wasn't going to get a concealed carry permit anyways. And then, go through teenage years, get into my young 20s. My husband's in the Marine Corps. He gets out of the Marine Corps. He finishes college, and we move to Washington for his job. Now, we moved to Washington 20 years ago, and Washington, as far as guns, is a paradise compared to New York. So what a lot of people don't understand is what they're seeing on TV and the news and the internet about Seattle is not what Seattle was 20 years ago. Okay. It was still 20 years ago, a lot different than a lot of places. People were, socially liberal. They left each other alone. It was a very chill place. But when we came here, my husband bought his first civilian firearm, a Glock 19, everybody's first civilian firearm, everybody's first firearm in general. And he went to the store. He got his concealed carry permit, and it was like $35 at the time. He got fingerprinted. We went down and both got it, and they sent it to us within 2 weeks. And he went to the store and he purchased the firearm, and he showed them his concealed carry permit, and he took it home that day, and we went to the range the next day. So 20 years ago, it was not like this. And a couple things about that is people will say, well, why don't you just move? And the reality for us is we will move at some point, because Washington is not our home. New York is our home. We're not going back there, because now we're fully embedded into the firearms community. So we won't go there, but we will go somewhere where we can get a little closer. That's a personal desire of us, is to get a little closer to our family. We've lived away for 20 years. So we will move at some point, but what good did moving from New York do us when you're talking about the firearms thing? So we had about 15 years reprieve, which some people will say is a long time. And we don't have kids, but what if we did have kids and we wanted to stay here for them? What if we had grandkids by now and we didn't want to move from here? What would we do besides fight? That's the only thing that we can do. It's the only thing left. And if the people in the states that are having no issues right now, I won't say good gun laws, because there's no such thing as a good gun law, but the people who are not bumping up against the issues that we're bumping up, if they don't pay attention, and I mean very close attention, and fight the very little minor things that don't seem like a big deal, it won't matter what state you move to, because they'll do it to you in that state too. And I've had this conversation many times and people don't believe me, but it will come to your state faster than you will even realize. And I think that some states are next on the list, and they are the states that people living there think it will never happen here.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. You mentioned New York. I actually grew up in Boston, so
Okay.
I'm very familiar with the East Coast love of firearms and all the
Yeah.
things associated. I mean, my dad wanted to join the local skeet shooting club, and the rings he had to jump through just to even get started in that process was absurd.
Yeah, it's
Absolutely
Massachusetts
absurd.
is it's a crazy state too, and it hasn't gotten any better. It's, much like New York. I was reading the news yesterday, and Kathy Hochul signed in 3 new gun control measures maybe yesterday or Monday, I can't remember, that are, again, absolute nonsense. And you read that, and if you live in New York, or keep up with New York like I do, because my family still lives there, you think, what other gun laws are there? I mean, what could you possibly be passing into law that is going to do anything? And besides the fact, I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so much, everybody says New York City, and it's like, no, not New York City. New York City is this little tiny bit, and there's a whole other state. I grew up in Buffalo, but you think about a city like New York City, and there are people just walking down the street randomly slashing people with knives. So what are you going to do about that? If people want to harm others, they're going to harm others. It does not matter what measure you put in, what law you put in, how much money you spend in your state. It makes not one iota of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally makes sense. And you mentioned, to keep fighting, especially while you're in Washington, and that is your residence,
Mhm.
and your home for now. What has it been like being the Empowered 2A coordinator, and what does that kind of entail? What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a new position for me. I've worked with Empowered 2A for a couple of years, just because I had believed in their organization, and I still do. Being the coordinator is, it gives you 2 major responsibilities as far as like 2 metrics. And the first one is to put on a range day. So a woman's only range day in your state. A few weeks ago, actually a month ago now, we did our second annual National Women's Range Day, and that was in Vegas at Staccato Vegas, which was formerly Prairie Fire, if you're familiar with that. And that was really good. So we love the national one. It's a great big event to put on, but we like the state ones as well. Gives you a chance to kind of get into your community and meet those people, because as you can probably imagine, I am not embedded in a local female gun community in suburban Seattle, Washington right now. So that will be one. And the other is to just get involved in political action. So you can do a rally day, have a dinner with your representatives. Testimony is part of that. So I have for years written testimony and submitted it in the written form and used my Instagram platform to, kind of alert people and contact people and also give them the easy way to do it. Because the reality of this stuff, and I think the reason that a lot of this stuff gets missed is because I think it's a general for our society, but I'll say living in an area like I do outside of Seattle, this is an area where you have to hustle to be able to afford to live here. You are not getting a lot of free time. It takes my husband an hour to get to work in the morning and an hour to come home at night. And, we have more free time than others because we don't have kids, but I could imagine having kids and, you have maybe 15 minutes to a half an hour to yourself at night. You're certainly not going on to rewatch testimony or going on to read an entire bill. I mean, our legislators don't even read the bill. Like most people aren't going to do that. So I have been trying to, give people the easy button, not tell them what to do, but give them the easy button if they know what they want to do. And so I've used my platform for that for the past couple of years. And, this session came around and I thought it couldn't get worse. I mean, I knew it could, but last session we got an assault weapons ban, which is worse than any state. It's worse than my home state of New York. So I was interested to see what they would bring around. And of course, we knew permit to purchase would be on there because it has failed 2 or 3 sessions, I think. So I figured, they do allow remote testimony now. The Capitol's with traffic about an hour and a half away for me, which is feasible some days, but never on the day that, they're doing it. And of course, it's that thing where you have to get there before they open to get parking and they don't let you into the room and they push it out till the end. And so not an excuse not to do it by far, but they do allow remote testimony now. So I figured, just get that first one over with. And, it will be one of those things where it's like, that's not as bad as you thought it would be. So yeah, that was the first hearing for 1163. So now we're on third or fourth time here, wherever we are in the process. Yeah, it's kind of, for me, because I have the time freedom to do that, it feels to me like kind of the minimum that I can do.
Yeah, yeah. And I would imagine, I'll assume that it motivates you even further, to keep fighting. What was that like to testify? Was it a little nerve-wracking and you're like, oh, I don't know if like this is exactly what I want to be doing?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just be a local range instructor, or, did it really fuel that fire even?
Yeah, a little bit of both. I wasn't as nervous as I thought I was. And I was trying to figure out why. I'm not generally nervous public speaking. I never have been, even since a kid. I've had a lot of practice talking on camera. I've had a lot of practice talking on podcasts. I've had a lot of practice now talking in person. And in, my previous life and previous career, I've spoken on stages to hundreds of people and that sort of thing. So a few things, I reminded myself of a few things. One, the legislators are not smarter than me. They're not more educated than me. And they literally got that job by people voting, lazy people voting them in. They're not even good at that job and they're not well-spoken people. So that was one thing that, I just reminded myself, like, they're not your boss. You're their boss. So they're not in charge of me. This is like, not a graded thing or anything like that. I feel very passionately about this, particularly in the area of women, but for all people. And I feel that it is more difficult for women to speak up in this area. And that is like a very multi-layered thing, but I do feel it's been more difficult for women to speak up. So I thought, I have a platform and I have the time, and let me just represent women in that way, or maybe inspire women to do that. But it has been a little bit, I have gone back and forth over the last couple of years, because I do get on the internet and I do pop off a lot, and I do say things that a lot of people don't like. And if you Google my name, it is gun, 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 hates gun laws. It is all kinds of stuff on there, between content that I've put out and articles that I've written and podcasts that I've been on and all that kind of stuff. So I also understand that not everybody has the freedom to do that with their job. They don't want their name connected with that. And I don't fault people for that. Like, you need to feed your family first in this society. Like, you need to take care of yourself first. So I don't fault people for that at all. So yeah, for me, I guess I could say it emboldened me a little bit, because it's like, a couple of years ago, I had to sit down with my husband, and we had to have the talk of, am I going all in on this, or am I just going to back away and just be the concealed carry girl online? And I have to say, my husband is very supportive, and he was like, you should go all the way with this. He's always been on board for this, and he's been further down the gun control journey than he started it farther back than I did, and kind of gave me a lot of guidance at the beginning of that. So
Yeah, well, that's awesome. I mean, I just think what a state to put up a fight in, though. For sure. Like, you certainly have your work cut out for you. I'll give you that.
yeah, and even if we didn't live here, or even if we didn't intend on moving from here, I think Washington is worth fighting for. I think that Washington is one of the most beautiful states in the entire country, and that is a hill that I'll die on. I've been to most states in this country, and our rain and darkness aside, Washington is a place where you can drive a couple hours to high desert, you can drive a couple hours to rainforest, you can drive to the mountains. Every day I drive out of my house, I have a clear shot of Mount Rainier. In the summer, we have the greenest grass you've ever seen in your life. Hands down, in the entire country, we have the greenest grass from all the rain. And it is just a beautiful, beautiful state that has been compromised by insanely liberal ideals. And it's not just gun control that's happening here, but I believe the gun control is a way for them to get the other stuff.
Yeah, and folks not even paying attention. I think it was Colorado. Someone posted on social media during one of the sessions, everybody just on their phones, just playing Candy Crush and not really even participating. And regardless of the topic at hand, is that really who you want to represent your state and your family and your well-being? Is folks who are like, yeah, okay, sure, send it, send what? Do you know what we're talking
Yeah.
about?
I think people don't know that that's going on, because that doesn't get publicity. You have to be in certain circle on the internet. You have to be on a certain side of X to see that sort of thing, right? And it's not as bad in Washington as far as what we've caught. But I definitely can see them checked out when I'm testifying, right? Like, I can see them checked out. The last time, like, the Democratic committee chair, she was just like staring daggers when I was talking about, this stuff. And her assistant, whatever they call her, they caught her in another meeting sleeping, and that picture's been circulating. And these people get voted in because people are busy here, and they vote hardcore party lines. They do not even take a second to think. And, that's not a criticism. I know a lot of people who are Republicans who vote hardcore party lines. And I'll tell you that if you didn't before, when you move to a state like this, you will now, because you literally think anybody in office, anybody who was a moderate Republican could do better in office, even if they don't even care about gun control. Like, you're so desperate at this point to get somebody else in there. But the problem that we're having in Washington right now is that our legislators that are being voted in are not even Democrats. I mean, they are far, far left liberals who are looking to make their own personal points, and it is not for the greater good of Washington, and it wouldn't be for any state. And so that's what we're struggling with right now, is that they have their mind made up about many, many things, and they are not even willing to entertain another ideal or education. So this goes for the entire country. But what happens when you have this gun control is that the people who are suggesting this, they get the idea from another state or, somewhere else, and they say, well, we're going to present this bill, but they have so little knowledge about how firearms even work, but they are making the laws that are governing about how you buy, use, carry, keep in your home firearms. So they are not even open to somebody who would be a firearms expert going in there and saying, hey, I read this part of the bill and that's not how it works. Let me tell you how it works and see if, we can come to an agreement here that at least if we're going to do this, it's not this uneducated mess of just, we want to get all the guns off the street, which will never happen. So here's another thing that we're just throwing at the wall. So when the crime goes up, we can say, hey, we tried. What do you want us to do? We tried, So it's just crazy because they're just not educated in any sense about firearms, and they are governing that.
Yeah, it's certainly hard to listen to. I forget the exact Biden quote when he spoke about firearms, but it was something just so horrendously unintellectual. You pull the firing pin and the trigger goes off. What happens to the upper or the AR on
Yeah.
your shotgun? And you're like, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The
excellent.
same guy that told everybody to just shoot a warning shot with a shotgun.
Yeah,
He said his wife would have a shotgun for her home defense. If Jill Biden can shoot a shotgun without falling over, I'll give you my next paycheck.
Yeah, that's too funny. You certainly have your work cut out for you there. And then with the creation and the running of casual and tactical, and I'll post the handle down below. You've had the opportunity to create some really fun content and some engaging content. And what has that been like on the on the review side and the merchandise side, and how fun has that been?
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Casual and Tactical started as not what it is now. I didn't think it was going to be anything. And, the quick story of that is about 6 years ago, I had my Instagram hacked and taken over. So it was just my name, and it was just an Instagram that I posted, life stuff on that I had really since Instagram had started. And I had grown a little small following, 3,000 or something like that. And, I'm a copywriter by trade. So I would post a lot of like marketing help and stuff to kind of this like women's small business niche that I've worked in for a long time. And one day I woke up and I couldn't get into my Instagram, and, I did the freaking out, and I went to my email, and it was like a Russian email address, and they were like, we need X amount of Bitcoin. And I was like, I'm not giving you anything. Like, it's my name. What are you going to do with it? You know what I mean? Like, what's the worst you can do with it? Just like, I guess they could post weird stuff on it, but I never was able to recover it. And I had 2-factor authentication on it. And I later found out that they kind of like took over. I was like changing my password, and they were like in my home network somehow, and they were like scraping that password right away. And so as soon as I would do it, they would be able to have that, right? So I got all that taken care of, and I was like really bummed because, I've always been a storyteller and a photographer, and all my words and photos, I still had my photos, but all my words for like a decade were gone. So I thought, what am I going to do now? And shortly before that happened, I had started posting a little bit of concealed carry content on there just to see like how it would go over, right? Like I had done it for a while, but I was like, let me see how it will go over. And I started getting a lot of private messages from people. Women won't talk in public about this, but they'll talk in private. And I was like, I was starting to think about it. So I was like, what if I did a very niche account? And that's how Casual and Tactical was born. And, I thought it would be cool if I got my account hacked and then I start this account and then it takes off, but like not thinking that it would happen because I wasn't putting a lot of time into it. I think it was the right combination of not a lot of women doing this at the time. Instagram was, I wouldn't say lax, but compared to how they are now, it was a lot easier to get stuff through then. And, I gained a couple thousand followers pretty quickly. And then I was like, all right, you got to do something. You got to figure out what you're going to do with this. You're either going to put some time into this and see if will grow, or you're going to just, have it as kind of a deal. So I decided to put some time into it. People started, saying, hey, can we send you stuff? And do you want to try stuff? And that was cool because I hadn't tried a lot of things myself at the time. I had tried a lot of holsters, which was my problem until I found one that I could carry with. And it kind of grew from there. And it grew a little quicker than I could keep up with, but I just rolled with it. It's changed a little bit. And on the gear side of it, I would say I have been really intentional about only accepting product that I would purchase myself. You get inundated very quickly when your page grows, and I don't fault the people that take all the product. If that's their deal, they can do that. What I had decided very quickly when it started to grow was that I was not going to be a gear review page exclusively, and that I was not going to do content for product trade. I wanted to write in the industry. And 3 years into it, I got my opportunity to write in the industry, which is what I'm doing now still, and where I'm kind of focusing the majority of my energy. And so I kind of held out, and it's hard. A lot of people, I've gotten hundreds of messages of, we'll send you this free thing, and I've got a closet full of stuff that, some of it I use, some of it I don't. But outside of that, there was like hundreds of stuff that I did not even accept. And so that's hard to do, but I decided that was my goal. My goal was to write in the industry. I wanted it to be something bigger than the gear review, because I knew that I wouldn't keep up with that. That's a lot of work to make all that content and, do all the videos and all that kind of stuff. And I kind of wanted to just make videos that like felt like a video that I would want to make, which is still what I do. And so, it's been cool, but I've gotten to try a lot of cool things in the industry that, maybe I would not have even been introduced to had I not had the page.
Yeah, well, for me, that was kind of the draw to even getting into the space, was to one, to see where it goes, but two, the networking and just kind of opening doors. And for me, you got to find it interesting, right? Like, I'm not going to create a knitting podcast because I don't knit.
Yeah.
Like, I used to watch baseball, but I'm not a huge baseball or basketball fan these days. So a sports podcast, I don't know,
Yeah.
So you then certainly have to find what fuels the fire, for sure. So you mentioned some of the articles and being able to write in this space. What are some projects you're working on, and what exciting stuff do you have going on there?
Yeah, I've had a full week of interviews this week, interviewing companies. I'll often be able to contact, companies that I wouldn't have contacts with before, right? Through this writing. And, it's usually starts as me calling like, hey, can I get a quote for this article? Your company is like an expert in this. I love what you're doing, and I think this would really help me out. And then just, talking with these people that work at these companies that have just these like really cool jobs that I would have never talked to before, talk to them for like a half an hour about all kinds of stuff. So I've had a full week of that. Right now I'm working on a multi-article piece, which has been a long time coming. And it's about the intersection of fashion and firearms. So kind of where the two meet, and a lot of, why Casual and Tactical was started in the first place, and, a bit about that journey. and also how that has evolved just in my time in the firearms industry and like carrying and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then I've got a couple others, kind of more on the technical side. And I hope this year I get some time to refresh Women's Guide to Concealed Carry. So I wrote that, gosh, it's got to be 3 or 4 years now. It's all still good information, but there's stuff that I've added to, my daily carry that I would want to, get in there and more options, because I don't know, since I have started this, there have been so many more options for everyone, but particularly for women. And if you're just getting into the space, it's kind of hard to keep up with all the options, because number one, it's very expensive to just buy holster after holster, bag after bag to try it. So I try to be a place where I can try all that stuff for women, and then they can, say, well, that looks like something I'd want to try, and maybe they can narrow their choices down.
Yeah, that's awesome. You touched on a few things when you said that you'd reach out for a quote and folks would just kind of start talking.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that I realized, so the first time I ever went to a gun range, I was so intimidated. I was like, this is just going to go poorly. Like, they're going to know that I know nothing, and it's just going to be judgment and ridicule, And it wasn't, I brought some of that in with me, some of that feeling in with me. And I wish I was able to kind of shake it out outside, and not. But now, having started this podcast and really throwing myself into the space, I've realized that I'll say 99% of the folks out there, in the 2A community are some of the kindest, most generous people, with their time, with their knowledge. And that's something I really hope everybody, regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, can hear and understand. They're not all the image, that the media paints. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And that sounds like a lot of fun, being able to,
Yeah.
and that's part of the reason I'm really loving the idea of the podcast, is the connection and hearing different people's stories, and hopefully bringing in a substantial audience, that may be living in New York or Massachusetts and wants to hear about someone's fight in Washington, or I now live in Utah, and that 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 move from Massachusetts to Utah was eye-opening for sure. And you also co-lead the Armed Women of America. Yeah, what is that all about? What have you been up to with that?
Yeah, late last year, early this year, we started a virtual chapter. So Armed Women of America, if you're not familiar, they have chapters all over the country, and it's a nonprofit. So these are all volunteer led, and it will be a local chapter, will be usually a couple instructor leaders, and you'll meet at a local range once a month. And they will do, depending on the month, they'll do different things. They'll have kind of special shoots. They'll do stuff where it's like we're doing education for new shooters, and then they'll have open shoots, and just kind of a time for women to get together with other women and have this time monthly. So a friend of mine who is a co-leader, she had approached me because she was in contact with the national director of Armed Women of America. She had run a chapter for a long time in her local area, and then her husband was deployed and they moved overseas. And so they had to shut down their chapter. And when they came back, she had been talking to the national director, and they had talked about an online option. And, it took a little bit to kind of flesh it out, because, the whole premise of this is getting in person and shooting, going to a range and shooting. So what would that look like? And so I had the time to do it, and we knew that it would be a little bit of a learning experience, and we thought, well, this might be a little bit slow to start, but who we were targeting was women whose local chapters had closed, because that happens for whatever reason. The leaders, they just can't volunteer anymore. They're not getting enough input or whatever it is. Women who were in the throes of raising kids and they could not commit to leaving their house to go do this once a month, or even if, half of the year, they couldn't commit to that. Women who just liked learning at home. So live shooting aspect wasn't the deal breaker for them. They were wanting to learn about other things. So we thought, let's try it and see how it goes. So we launched it, I believe in January this year was our first meeting. We launched it and we grew very quickly within a month and a half to over 100 members. And we are, on our way to 120 members now. So it's been much bigger than we thought that it would be. And it's been really cool. Our meetings are once a month and we do them, via private Zoom link, and we have a theme every month. So we taught the NRA Refuse to be a Victim class. I've taught a class about off-body carry. We've taught about safe storage. And this year, for our plan for this year, we are having a really good amount of guest speakers. So we're having some, industry experts come in and speak to our group. So it's been very exciting to see it grow, and it's a great option. It's also a great option as dual membership. So Armed Women of America, you can go and have your in-person chapter and shoot. And then for another $15 a year, you can join our chapter and get on the call with us, which we record. So you can also watch it at your leisure, which works for a lot of ladies. That's been a really great option. So yeah, I'm interested to see where it goes. We're early in the year and I would love to see it grow to 200 members this year. That might be a lofty goal, but that's what's on my goal board for that project this year.
Well, yeah, so I know you're hopefully, fingers crossed, testifying today, so I won't take up too much more of your time.
Yep.
What's something we can look forward to kind of seeing from you and from your projects upcoming?
Yeah, I would say, I want to be held accountable to get the second edition of Women's Guide to Concealed Carry out. So I'm going to work on that, keep me accountable on that. Got some articles. I always post that stuff in my stories. I post it in my link. If you go to my link in my Instagram bio, you can just get a link that will take you to all the articles. And, there's lots of them now, and, more stuff to come with Empowered 2A. We are wrapping up the session in Washington here. I think August 27th is the last day for that. So I will be happy to see that go for the year. But of course, the fight does not stop there. I look forward to keeping everybody informed about that and hopefully making that an easier process for people to follow.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly very appreciative of your time. You seem very busy. I'm honored by the opportunity to have you on, and I appreciate all the info. And let's touch base soon, and we'll see how the book's coming and some of the updates. Thank you so much for coming on, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate you having me. This was fun.